Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us. The Secretary General and the President will deliver short statements and then take a few of your questions. Secretary General.
President Poroshenko, Petro, it's good to have you back at the NATO headquarters. It's great to see you again. We just met in New York in connection with the UN General Assembly in September, and then we met in Warsaw in July. And I think that the high frequency of our meetings reflects the very close cooperation and partnership between NATO and Ukraine. So it's great to see you again, and I really appreciate this opportunity to once again to address the very important issues of the situation in Ukraine and how NATO can continue to provide support to Ukraine. And the Ukraine crisis continues to be a black mark on the map of Europe. We know that thousands of people have been killed and many, many injured. And NATO support for Ukraine is unwavering. We will continue to support the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of Ukraine. And we do not and we will not recognize Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. And we are very much concerned about Russia's continued destabilization of eastern Ukraine. For months, the full implementation of the peace deal has stalled. That is why I welcome that you had a meeting yesterday in the Normandy format in Berlin. And I thank you for updating me on the outcome of that meeting and the discussions you just had, including the plan to create a new roadmap for implementing the Minsk agreement. And it is essential to implement the Minsk agreement because the Minsk agreement is the only viable way to a lasting, peaceful solution to the crisis in eastern Ukraine. All parties must fully implement the Minsk agreement. Ukraine has responsibilities to implement its commitments, but Russia has a significant responsibility in this regard because it continues to support the separatists, and we know that the OCT monitors must have safe access to the whole territory to be able to implement the agreement, and we have seen that they have been hindered in doing that several times. And we've also seen that threats against the monitors and jamming of the UAVs are undermining the implementation of the Minsk agreement, and these actions are unacceptable because they are in total violation of the Minsk agreement. Ceasefire violations must end, and we cannot allow that these ceasefire violations are becoming the new normal in Ukraine. NATO and NATO allies will continue to support Ukraine. We will provide practical support. We will provide political support. We will provide support through our different trust funds, helping you with build security institutions, and we will work on areas like, for instance, cyber defense and rehabilitation of wounded soldiers, and in other areas to help and support Ukraine in different practical ways. Ukraine, for its part, has to continue to implement reforms, fight corruption, and I welcome your personal engagement in pursuing the path of reforms in Ukraine. So once again, it has been a great pleasure to meet with you, but let me also add that we, in addition to the situation in Ukraine, we also addressed the very serious situation in Syria, because also in Syria we see a Russian presence, and we have seen a substantial military buildup of Russia in Syria. And I welcome the temporary ceasefire in Aleppo, but this does not go nearly far enough. following weeks of Syrian and Russian strikes against civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, the humanitarian situation in Aleppo is appalling. We need a real solution on the ground in Aleppo, not a short-lived ceasefire, but one that addresses the desperate humanitarian crisis and which will lead to a credible cessation of hostilities. And therefore I join the international community in its calls on Russia to help end the bloodshed in Aleppo, and to play a constructive role in finding a negotiated solution to the crisis. So once again, Petro, it's always a great pleasure to have you here, and good to have you back at the NATO headquarters. So welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, dear Secretary General, dear Jens. That's a real great pleasure for me to be here today, together with our very important and reliable partner, NATO. And I was really glad to meet with you, my colleague, my good friend, and very good friend of Ukraine. We have continued the comprehensive and trustful exchange of opinions on the situation in Ukraine, security situation in Ukraine, connected with the Russian aggression against sovereign and independent country, Ukraine. And that's true. In particular, I brief very detailed the recent escalation, the situation about the recent escalation on the security situation on the Donbass. I informed about yesterday meeting in the Normandy format, because we have a very long discussion. Instead of 2 hours, we have almost 7 hours discussion. And significant part of this discussion was dedicated to the security situation. Once again, Ukraine remained committed to the Minsk agreements, all the Minsk agreements. It is especially stressed during yesterday's discussion, and it's ready to implement its part of the commitments, but not at the expense of the Ukrainian interest. We insist that now extremely urgent to implement the whole security package, including the immediate and comprehensive ceasefire, including the uninterrupted access to the special monitoring mission of OSCE, both to the touchline, to the sealed storage, to the uncontrolled part of Ukrainian-Russian border, and to the whole occupied territory. And to move forward with the political process, we need to see real deliverables on the security track. That means that at the first place, establishing lasting and comprehensive situation with the security. That is why Ukraine proposed the comprehensive roadmap with the two main principles: principle of the sequence and principle of the guarantees. We was very much satisfied that this principle was strongly supported by our German and French partners, and today that was put in the agenda as absolutely necessary step to create, based on the principle which we discussed and confirmed yesterday, the comprehensive road map of the implementation of the Minsk process, which would properly interlink steps on security and political tracks, and we believe that this is the only way to ensure the progress of the implementation of Minsk agreement. I'm grateful to the Secretary General Stoltenberg for his firm solidarity with Ukraine and support our vision for further settlement progress. We hope that our NATO partners will help to pursue Russian side to ensure a meaningful implementation of the Minsk agreement in the first instance, the security part. Today we have also discussed the possibility for further enhancement of Ukraine-NATO cooperation, and I'm grateful to NATO for its ever-growing support for Ukraine defense capability building and reform and your support, advisory support, technical support to reform our security and defense sector. This is very important now for us, and we are satisfied very much with our cooperation. We are practically grateful for the unprecedented of its scope NATO comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine, which provide important assistance tied to specific need of Ukraine in implementing reform of defense sector. And I fully share the position that the best response to the NATO, best response of NATO to the Russian aggression is the powerful Ukraine, effective reform to help my country to achieve NATO standards. This is exactly what we are doing in my country. And that is why we have decided to change our approach on the implementation of the annual national program of Ukraine, NATO cooperation, ANP. And now, as of next year, the ANP will not longer be a simple list of NATO-Ukraine activities, but rather it would be a reform program in order to achieve NATO standard. And we will also create a synergy between the above-mentioned reform and all assistance and support measures provided by NATO in Ukraine. And I want to once again stress that it is extremely important for me as a president and as a commander-in-chief of Ukrainian armed forces. And as of next year, all NATO assistance will be directly connected to the reform task. And the benchmark for the achieving tangible results of this reform remain the same, 2020. And this is mentioned in our Strategic Defense Bulletin. This is the roadmap of Ukrainian reform of security and defense sector. And this is fixed in our national security strategy of Ukraine. No less important, it's deepening Ukraine-NATO cooperation in strengthening regional security and countering security challenges created by the Russian aggression. And in this context, we have shared the opinion necessity of the increasing mutual situational awareness and interoperability of armed forces. This is the new format of the cooperation under the so-called NATO Enhanced Opportunity Program, and today we have agreed analyzing the possibility of cooperation in this field. I would like also once again express my gratitude to the NATO and to the Secretary General Stoltenberg personally for their very strong and unwavering support for Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. The alliance solidarity with Ukraine is of utmost importance for us. Thank you very much indeed, Jens, for that.
Thank you. We'll start with Yunyan.
Very good afternoon. News agency Union Ukrainian Irina Sommer. Question for Secretary General. Secretary General, in the light of yesterday's negotiation in the Normandy format, do you see a possibility or use to hold next NATO-Russia Council to discuss this issue also with Russian side? And question for Ukrainian President in Ukrainian language, if I may.
Dear President, what are your main conclusions from your visit to the Netherlands, Maastricht and to Brussels?
After the illegal annexation of Crimea in the spring of 2014, NATO decided to suspend all practical cooperation with Russia. And that decision still stands. We have also implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense since the illegal annexation of Crimea as a direct response to the aggressive actions of Russia against Ukraine. But we also decided to maintain channels for political dialogue open because we do not believe that we should try to isolate Russia. We believe that we should combine military strength, defense and deterrence with the political dialogue. And therefore we have maintained the NATO-Russia Council as a platform, as a channel for political engagement with Russia. We have also made it very clear that we will raise the question of Ukraine, and therefore we have had Ukraine on the agenda on all the meetings of the NATO-Russia Council since the spring of 2014. We had a meeting in July where we discussed where we discussed Ukraine in the NATO-Russia Council. And NATO allies strongly expressed the full support for Ukraine, the full support for the sovereignty and the territorial integrity. And we also made it very clear that we do not recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea. We are ready to have a new meeting of the NATO-Russia Council in the near future. There is no date that has been fixed or decided, but we are ready to convene a new meeting, and we are in dialogue with Russia on the agenda and on the modalities. But what is clear is that in the next meeting of the NATO-Russia Council, we will also raise the question of Ukraine and once again underline both our support for Ukraine, but also underline the importance of the full implementation of the Minsk agreements, and also now support the initiative to try to establish a roadmap to implement the Minsk agreements. So we believe in political dialogue because we think it's important to convey clear messages on many issues, and also on Ukraine, of course.
Дуже дякую за це запитання. Я думаю, що
Thank you very much for this issue, for this question. I think our delegation had a very intense program today, in spite of the fact that we came around 3 o'clock in the morning, flying after the Normandy format meeting, and already at 8 o'clock I met the President of the European Parliament, where we discussed the necessity to speed up the decision-making by the Parliament about visa-free regime, and also about the support to the trade preferences in the DSFTA, which was offered to Ukraine by European Commission. You have seen the reaction of the President of the European Parliament. We are very strong in our position that we're very sure that we have the strong support from the majority of the European Parliament, and as for today, after the suspension mechanism will be solved, we don't have any doubts that this decision will be implemented. And I had the possibility to be assured in that during the summit meeting of the European People's Party, where the President of European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, and the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, and the heads of the governments, Angela Merkel, and many other heads of governments, and they have reiterated again and again that the visa-free regime should be speeded up. Ukraine should be supported in the continuation of the ratification mechanism, and trade preferences should be given to Ukraine. And what we have seen in Maastricht today, and this is a symbolic city. 25 years ago, in this city, the financial union began. This is the place which is the kind of symbol of European integration. I was for the first time in that hall where the historic documents have been signed, and I have really felt a very firm and reliable support from the European to our aspirations in many other questions of our cooperation. And I had more than 10 meetings today with the heads of states and governments, and all of them have accentuated that when Russia is demonstrating its irresponsible behavior in Syria, in Aleppo, on the background of that, today's discussion in the European Council, the question of Russia, the European Council has a very firm position on supporting Ukraine and supporting of its territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Thank you. We'll go next to Reuters, please.
Thanks, Dylan. Robin Emmett from Reuters. Secretary General, a question on Syria. We see that diplomatically Russia is making efforts to talk, but at the same time it's sending warships through the English Channel to the Eastern Mediterranean, and some have suggested that this is for a final assault Aleppo. What do you make of this?
What we have seen is that there has been many attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure in Aleppo, and I welcome that we now have a temporary ceasefire, but that's in no way enough. We need a lasting ceasefire, and which is fully respected. When it comes to the Russian carrier group, which is on its way to the Mediterranean, it is important to underline that Russia, of course, has the right to operate in international waters. And this is not the first time we have seen this carrier group being deployed to the Mediterranean. That has happened several times before. But what creates concern now is that this carrier group may be used to contribute to military operations over Syria and be used to increase attacks on Aleppo. And that's something very different than to deploy a carrier group to the Mediterranean as part of a normal deployment, which we have seen before. So we are concerned that the Russian carrier group will support military operations in Syria in ways which will increase humanitarian and human suffering. And that's why we are concerned about this deployment. NATO navies will, in a normal way, monitor the Russian ships as they approach the Mediterranean. They will do so in a responsible and measured way, as they always do. Because this is part of the way we are following Russian military activities. So it's not unnormal that we see deployment of Russian carrier groups in the Mediterranean. But what is unnormal is that this carrier group can be part of a combat operation, airstrikes against Aleppo. And that is the reason why we are concerned.
Thank you. We have time for just one more. Rudolph, please.
Snarshino Rudo Media Network. One question for President Poroshenko. Mr. President Poroshenko, do you believe that the new roadmap that you decided in Berlin on the level of foreign minister can help you to implement the Minsk agreement? And how could be that new roadmap until November? Do you believe that is the enough time for it? And then question for Secretary General Stoltenberg. You mentioned the war in Syria, in Ukraine. You know that now is the operation of Mosul. How you see the participation of the member state of NATO in this operation, and now the Peshmerga, the Kurdish forces, fought, and today there are many killed, and there is no enough airstrike of the member state of NATO. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that without roadmap it's impossible to implement that, because the roadmap should demonstrate the sequence and responsibility of those who do not implement in the Minsk agreement. And if we agreed that it's necessary to provide the comprehensive ceasefire, that would be a responsible person. Who don't do that, it would be fixed by the OSCE. If we agreed to provide the uninterrupted access for the OSCE inspector and they will block, that would be the responsibility, and the whole world will see who is responsible for that, and it would be done immediately, now. If we told about the providing, for example, the armed OSCE mission, police mission, which was agreed, and this is another result of the Normandy format. This is very important. And by the way, I want to stress that it would be a meeting on the level of ministers. That would be just a preparation work, because this roadmap should be approved on the summit of the Normandy format. And you will see that you see now that we don't have this meeting from October last year, from the last meeting in Paris, and Ukraine paid a huge price during this year for not implemented Minsk agreement by Russia. This is the hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilian was killed by Russian occupational troops. And with that situation, we think that if we demonstrate the readiness to the public documents as a roadmap with a practical date on each step, that certainly help us to go further to demonstrate a progress for return Ukrainian sovereignty on the occupied territory by Russia. And I think that the unique solidarity and unity the world, the European Union, our American, Canadian partner throughout the world demonstrate. This is also another very important reason for optimism for the implementation of Minsk.
All NATO allies and NATO support the international coalition to counter ISIL, and we do so because we see that ISIL is responsible for atrocities, they are responsible for terrorist attacks, and they are responsible for killing thousands of civilians in Iraq, in Syria, but also they have been responsible for terrorist attacks in our own streets here in Europe. And NATO provides direct support to the coalition fighting ISIL. And last week we had a meeting here at NATO with Brett McCurk, the presidential envoy into the counter-ISIL coalition. And I also recently met with Prime Minister al-Badi and with the Iraqi foreign minister. So we are in close dialogue with Iraq and with the international coalition countering ISIL. And they have briefed us on the preparations for the military operation to liberate Mosul. I welcome that operation. We know it's a difficult operation because there are many civilians in Mosul. And the international community has to do whatever it can to try to reduce the sufferings of civilians as much as possible. I know that the international coalition have provided many airstrikes and a lot of air support for the forces which are now on the ground conducting the military operation to liberate Mosul. But I will not comment on specific operational issues because this is not a NATO operation. It's a Iraq-led operation supported by the coalition. NATO supports the coalition. NATO allies are supporting the efforts of the Iraqi forces, and NATO is also training Iraqi forces, but these are operational issues which I think we should leave to those who are directly responsible for the operation in Mosul.
That's all we have time for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you, as always.